Despite a resilient win by the New Orleans Saints, there's still one big question lingering. Will the offense catch its rhythm? We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome in to another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day, every day, to all you everydayers out there. Don't forget, you can always subscribe and follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss the latest episodes. And if you want to keep the conversation going, one-on-one with me, take part in our exclusive film study, Q&A, early access, inside information, and much more. You can become a Locked On Saints insider by heading over to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSaints to join a community I would love for you to be a part of. As always, I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on your favorite social media, your New Orleans Saints expert, credentialed member of the media. You can find me as the senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network, Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation site, covering the New Orleans Saints every Tuesday on the Locked On NFL podcast, and here with you every single Monday through Friday, and then some on Locked On Saints. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster and for free. Visit linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. On today's episode of Locked On Saints, Payton Turner, turf toe injury. Looks like he's going to be gone for quite a while. What's next for him and the New Orleans Saints at the defensive end position? We're also going to take a look at Trevor Penning, why the New Orleans Saints didn't put him on the bench and why it was the right choice. But first, are the New Orleans Saints going to be able to improve on offense? Now, let me be careful about what I mean and clarify what I mean by improve here when it comes to the Saints offense. And really, it's just about catching that rhythm early and maintaining it more consistently than what we saw against the Tennessee Titans. Now, look, we can talk about how good the Tennessee Titans defense is. And as I've been saying for the past week or so, it is one of the NFL's top defenses. You saw that. Saints couldn't even rush for 3 yards per carry during this game. They got lucky a little bit that the Tennessee Titans got away from their run game, all those other things. But that has a lot to do with the New Orleans Saints defense and how well they played there. But when it came to the Saints offense, particularly during the first half, you saw a lot of struggles there. The offensive line struggling. It wasn't just Trevor Penning getting beat around the edge. You had some pressure right up the middle as well. Derek Carr sacked 4 times in the first half, threw the interception when he got a little gun happy, a little trigger happy rather, during that 2-minute drive at the 2-minute drill at the end of the first half. Him even saying of himself at the end of the game something like, yeah, no, that was just a dumb decision by me. That was just me being dumb. I got too cocky. I got too arrogant. I was making all the throws, blah, 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 and all those other things. So you saw the accountability there from him for sure, but you saw the struggles in that first half. In the second half, things kind of settled down a little bit. You saw the run game maybe get a little bit more, I don't want to say productive because, again, they didn't even reach 3 yards per carry on offense, but they continued to lean on it. They were able to get it done when they needed, especially Jamal Williams down at the very end when you needed that last first down. But the Saints, what I did like about what they did was that and this is maybe one of those signs of how they can improve and that they will improve moving forward, is that they didn't get away from the things that didn't go well in the first half. Saints averaged less than 3 yards per carry, sure, but they still ran the ball 27 times in this game. Scramble or 2 from Derek Carr as a part of that, but still did not get away from the run game. It remained a part of their game. You saw the issues with pressure early on in this game. In the second half, they sent Trevor Penning a little bit of help. Trevor Penning himself performed better in the second half as well. Helps that he got that help. Yes, I completely understand. They started chipping edge rushers over on that side, which, as Dennis Allen mentioned, is not massively out of the ordinary at all. But on top of doing that, Trevor Penning himself performed better, as well as the interior offensive line for New Orleans, which had some struggles early on in the game. So I think you can see the pieces that show you, sort of the breadcrumbs that show you, yes, this offense will be better after this week going into next week and all of those pieces. But I think maybe the biggest display of that was the way that this team was able to attack through the air. You had this huge connection from Derek Carr to Rashid Shaheed down that left sideline in a game otherwise that Rashid Shaheed started off a little shaky, right? He had the fumble on the opening kickoff, but he was able to shake that off. And then look at all the different ways that they got Rashid Shaheed involved. Yeah, the big bomb down the left sideline, but also the beautiful kind of slot fade route that they ran with him in the end zone, in the red zone, rather, to get the only touchdown of the game. Jet sweeps for Rashid Shaheed. You saw the screen passes to him as well. Those jet sweeps and screen passes didn't really develop into too terribly much in this game. However, they will over the course of time, and it sets up tendencies that you can try to break later. So when we look at just how much more diverse this offense was, we saw a lot of motion before the snap. We saw Chris Olave deployed on an angle route, a Texas route out of the backfield. That's something you usually see Alvin Kamara doing, but now you got to see Chris Olave do it, motioning into the backfield and taking a snap out of this sort of split back formation. We saw a bunch of misdirection in the run game. We saw the route diversity out of the slot. The Saints used the slot a ton of different ways in this game. The route diversity all around the field as well, spread the ball around a little bit. Maybe you'd like to see them spread the ball around a bit more. And that was before there was really even a Taysom Hill game plan. I wouldn't say that there was much of a Taysom Hill game plan in this one. There were a couple of snaps for him, but for the most part, he wasn't really a factor in this game the way that we've seen that he can be. But I don't know that that's a negative thing, as long as that was by design, right? You don't want to show everything your first game, right? They barely even use Jimmy Graham in the red zone. So there's still things left that will inherently raise this offense a little bit closer to its ceiling moving forward. But I do think that play calling was improved. I do think that sort of the diversity of the offense was improved despite the toughness of the defense that they were facing. And I thought that their commitment to their game plan was something that was really important to see as well, because we saw some times last year to where things were working in the first half, but then one or two things would go wrong and they would just move away from their game plan and try to adjust on the fly in a way that was really, really a change of direction, as opposed to a more precise approach to their original game plan with the sort of nuances and specificities worked out about, okay, now here's what the defense is doing. Here's how we still execute our game plan, influenced by what they're doing. And so they kind of were a little bit more in the latter in this game, which I thought was a really positive step forward. The biggest thing is, are you going to be able to get this offense to click right away in some of these games? The opening drive, or what ended up being their opening offensive drive, looked good. You saw the connections to Michael Thomas, Chris Olave, being able to get the ball out to some of the tight ends as well. Yeah, they ended up with a field goal, but we saw so many times last year that the opening drives were 3 and outs, no points on the board at all, not even a scoring drive and things like that so often last year. And so at least to be able to see them get to that point was good. Now, can they stay there moving forward after that opening drive, after the scripted plays where they're very comfortable and they kind of have to do things a little bit more based upon what they're seeing or being shown by the opposing defense? That is where they can separate themselves and where they'll need to improve going into next week against another talented front, maybe not as talented a defense as a whole, but another talented front in the Carolina Panthers. So will the New Orleans Saints offense improve? Well, A, it has no choice. It has to. But B, yeah, and I think that there are some fundamental building blocks, including 300 yards passing, when the Saints only did that twice in a 17-game stretch last year, that show you that, yeah, the foundation is there for them to continue to take their steps forward. Now, they just need to be able to make good on it and continue to build up. Coming up next, why didn't the New Orleans Saints bench Trevor Penning despite his first half struggles, and why it was the right choice? We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster and for free. Hiring is not easy, but LinkedIn Jobs helps to make it easier for you, especially with things like their screening questions, where you're able to kind of make sure you're getting a good idea of the experience, all of those requirements that you're looking for, even a little bit of the attitude of a potential hire and a potential person that you want to interview. It's one of the reasons why small businesses rank LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus their leading competitors. So go and check them out today. LinkedIn Jobs is going to help you find qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free today at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Don't forget linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Thank you, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day, every day. The New Orleans Saints gave up 4 sacks in the first half against the Tennessee Titans. We saw a couple of those come from Arden Key, the former LSU edge rusher, now Tennessee Titans edge rusher, getting around the left side with Trevor Penning. And a lot of folks are talking about, okay, maybe it's time to move James Hurst to left tackle and then plug in Andrus Peat at left guard. The New Orleans Saints did not make that decision, and it was the right decision to make. It was a much better second half for the New Orleans Saints offensive line. A completely protected Derek Carr, I wouldn't call him completely, but a better protected Derek Carr in the second half, and you saw the passing offense catch. I don't want to say it caught its rhythm, right? Because we're talking about how this offense needs to still catch its rhythm, but it got a little bit more consistent, was able to execute a bit better in the second half. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But particularly in the passing game. But I do think that a big part of that was the Saints not shaking up their offensive line. Like, let's really, really think about this. Just from the idea of, had the New Orleans Saints substituted Trevor Penning, would they have really been in a better position to have James Hurst at left tackle, a position that James Hurst can play but has not practiced at barely at all over the course of this offseason? Like, early on in training camp, when Andrus Peat would come in with the second team at left guard, you saw James Hurst bump out to left tackle. A couple of snaps every set of team reps, every period of team reps, but that's it. So would they have been better doing that and plugging Andrus Peat, the guy that every Saints fan wanted benched going into the beginning of this season and got their wish? I kept telling you all offseason, I think James Hurst is just starting left guard. That's what we saw. For 64 snaps, 100% of the snaps, the entire starting unit for the New Orleans Saints played through this game. And so there's something to be said about the continuity and the consistency of that as well. But would the Saints have really been in a better position to take Trevor Penning off the field, move James Hurst over, and plug in Andrus Peat? I don't know, because the Saints interior struggled a little bit in the first half as well. And look, when you're going against Jeffrey Simmons, there's going to be those moments, right? There's going to be those snaps where that's going to happen. But I think the more consistent struggle was happening over on the edge, particularly with Trevor Penning. So there is the piece of it that is the Saints made the right decision, because shuffling 2 positions on their offensive line against a very talented, particularly interior pass rush of the Tennessee Titans. Would you really have wanted Andrus Peat up against Jeffrey Simmons? I don't think so. And so instead, you go with the guy that has all the tools and just needs the experience. And maybe getting beat a couple of times is exactly what Trevor Penning needed, because he played a much better second half. Yes, they gave him help. Like we mentioned in the first segment there, they gave him help. You saw the running backs go out there and chip. You saw the tight ends get the hands on the edge rusher, things like that. That's fine, because that running back, that tight end, he's not staying there for the entire pass blocking rep. He's chipping, which means he's hitting and moving, right? And getting to the next place he's got to go, whatever it might be. So Trevor Penning is the one that had to sustain those blocks, and he did a much better job at that. So that's the second reason why I would say that it was the right decision to not bench Trevor Penning. First of all, you wouldn't have been in much of a better situation with Andrus Peat and James Hurst over on that side, more so because of Andrus Peat than because of James Hurst, or because of the play of Andrus Peat. And also, like, let's not forget that Andrus Peat's also not been present for the majority of the offseason as well, or at least a large part of the offseason as well. So he's probably, we asked Dennis Allen about what's going into the decision of James Hurst versus Andrus Peat at left guard. And one of the things that he mentioned was that Andrus Peat's really still getting back into football shape. So football conditioning probably would not have been the right choice for New Orleans. So there's that piece. But then the second piece to it is giving Trevor Penning the experience. Look, this was a game that you needed to win, yes, of course, and you needed to make sure that you were keeping your quarterback safe and keeping him healthy and all that. But as we saw, the worst shot that Derek Carr took in this game wasn't even in the backfield in terms of a blocker letting up. It was from a linebacker over pursuing and hitting Derek Carr in the face, which he apologized for to Derek Carr right after that play. But you know what I mean? Like, it's not as simple as offensive line, keep quarterback healthy. That's not the way that it works. You're going to get hit. no matter what. And so when you look at where the Saints are in terms of their ability to be able to keep Derek Carr healthy, yes, getting good play from Trevor Penning is a must, but it's not the entire equation. And so keeping him out there and saying, yo, go out there and get your experience, young blood, I thought that was a calculated risk by the New Orleans Saints. And this is what we've talked about all offseason. Especially during really since roster cuts, right? Trading away Will Lutz, going with Blake Grupe. What happens? Blake Grupe hits all 4 kicks, which includes an extra point, but also included a 52-yard field goal in a game where points were at a premium. You saw them move on from Bradley Roby so that they could rely on Alontae Taylor in the slot. I thought Taylor had a couple of moments, but played very well for the majority of the game. You're not going to win every rep. You can't. It's just not how it works. He played really well. And then we see keeping Trevor Penning in a calculated risk. All of these things being calculated risks by this New Orleans Saints team. And you'd much rather that than the conservative nature that they kind of presented or showed throughout the 2022 season. I think there was a lot of things in this one game that show you that the Saints are better now than they were at this point in the 2022 season. And I know they had that really exciting comeback at the beginning of the 2022 year, but remember where everything went immediately after that. Third reason that I do think that keeping Trevor Penning in was the right idea was those 64 snaps. 100% of the snaps in this game on offense, the offensive line were together. And if you remember correctly, if we accept the notion that Trevor Penning was to be the starter at the beginning of last year, in 2022, the Saints, much like their starting 5 secondary, including the slot corner, that their starting 5 offensive linemen never took a single snap together last year. Not a single one. Trevor Penning missed 12 games. Then you saw Cesar Ruiz miss some games. Or rather, that was toward the end of the season. But then you saw Eric McCoy miss some games. Andrews Pete missed some games. And then Cesar Ruiz toward the end of the season missed some games. And so you saw all of that. This game, 64 of them things together. All 5 of them. 100% of the snaps. There's value in that. There's value in that consistency. Another big test against a very good front next week on Monday night against the Carolina Panthers. Will we see improvement from Trevor Penning? That's going to be a big storyline to watch. Coming up next, we're going to take a look at what's next for Payton Turner and what's next for the New Orleans Saints at defensive end. Payton Turner dealing with a turf toe injury that will likely require surgery. What does it all mean? We got that coming up for you as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, official sports betting partner here on the Locked On Podcast Network and America's #1 sportsbook. And if it's your first time ever using FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, this is a great time to get started because new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. And if you're not a first-time customer, don't worry. When you put that $5 down, you're going to get $100 off of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube or YouTube TV. The New Orleans Saints favored right now up against the Carolina Panthers, -2.5 on the road. Expected to be a low-scoring affair, 40.5 in terms of the over-under. You can get in on all of that and player props and much more over at America's #1 sportsbook, FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to kick off the NFL season with a deal that you won't want to miss. FanDuel, make every moment more with the official partner of the NFL. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrap it up today's episode of Locked On Saints with some big news over on the defensive side of the football. We focused a lot on the offensive side of the football here. But the defensive side of the football, Payton Turner dealing with a turf toe injury that, according to NFL Network's Ian Rappaport, might likely require surgery. So I would expect it to require surgery. Saints have been dealing with these toe injuries quite a bit, man. Michael Thomas dealt with, well, I guess he had the dislocated toe. Then you also had, Trevor Penning at the beginning of last season, that last preseason game, he had the toe injury. He was out for the first 12 weeks with that. So you should expect something similar. Remember, there's an extra week between the third preseason game and the first regular season game now. So you have to consider, Payton Turner could potentially be out here for next 13, 14 weeks, right? Not available until weeks 14, 15, 16, somewhere around there, depending upon how the surgery goes and how it all heals, all these other things. But it stinks because for Payton Turner, this was the season, right? Like this was a big season for him. 2020 first round or 2021, first round draft pick, kind of going into a season now to where the Saints at the end of this year are going to have to make a decision about whether or not they take the 5th-year option on him. At this point, I would expect that they don't take the 5th-year option. Doesn't mean that they won't be interested in retaining him. We saw that with Cesar Ruiz, right? Cesar Ruiz, they didn't take the 5th-year option, but yet they gave him the 4-year, $44 million extension just a couple days before game time. And so we would see, or before kickoff, we could see something similar happen with Payton Turner. But this was a big season for him to be able to kind of prove like, hey, I've arrived, right? And I'm here and I'm healthy. He played extremely well throughout training camp, throughout the preseason. He was excellent in the preseason matchups and games. He was always in the backfield, whether it be in the run game or in the passing game during training camp. In the hand, I think he played like 7 snaps or something like that in this game against the Tennessee Titans. He had some nice plays in those moments. He was playing well, but then he has this toe injury. And look, I'm going to tell you exactly right now what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to go into the whole, Payton Turner's, injury prone and, he was a bust of a first round pick, whatever. Like, couldn't care less about any of those designations. None of them mean anything. The simple fact of the matter is that this sucks for Payton Turner. And this sucks for the New Orleans Saints too, because they felt like they were 4 deep immediately when it came to the defensive end spot. Remember, Payton Turner, Carl Granderson, they were in a position battle this offseason to figure out who was going to be the starter opposite Cam Jordan. Now, it was Carl Granderson who won that, and he showed you why with 1.5 sacks and 4 hits on the quarterback up against the Tennessee Titans. Don't get me wrong, but Payton Turner made that a battle, and he was a part of that battle, and he was firmly in there making his moves and getting stuff done and stacking days and things like that. And so, yeah, it sucks. And that, to me, is what the most important part is that it sucks for Payton Turner. But I'm hoping that he gets the opportunity to come back later on in the season and maybe gets to show something in the final remaining, games of the year and everything, and does enough to keep the confidence that the New Orleans Saints have shown in him going into that really, really, really important final year of his contract, the 4th year of his contract next season. But they'll have to make the 5th-year option decision this offseason, which makes things a little bit tougher. What does this mean for the New Orleans Saints at edge rusher? Well, it means that if you were disappointed in the fact that Isaiah Foskey was a healthy scratch going into this game, which was really more of a numbers thing than it was an evaluation of Isaiah Foskey at all, well, don't be disappointed anymore, because Isaiah Foskey's probably active next week, right? Like that's the presumed progression of that. I would expect to see maybe, the Saints are going to have now 3 open roster spots, assuming they move Payton Turner to injured reserve. They already have a spot vacated by Jake Haener while he serves a 6-game suspension. Traquan Smith's on injured reserve. So they're sitting at 50 out of 53 spots on their roster right now taken up. So there's some available spots. I would expect maybe Nico Lalos or Kyle Phillips to be signed up to the active roster, and then maybe they go out there and find another veteran edge rusher, maybe somebody else that they like or have spent a little bit of time with, and then get them back in the building on the practice squad. So the Saints will very likely do some shuffling at that position. But if you were wanting to see a little bit of Isaiah Foskey up against the Carolina Panthers next week, it seems, or really early on the season, looks like you'll see it against the Carolina Panthers next week, probably something around 15, 20 snaps or so. The Saints really, really leaned in with Cam Jordan and Carl Granderson during this game, and understandably so. They both played very, very well also, as did Tona Passanio. So the Saints are still okay. They're still fine at defensive end, but it does ding their depth quite a bit and might thrust Isaiah Foskey into a little bit of a larger role early on in the season than maybe the Saints were prepared to get him started. So we'll see how that ends up impacting them as they move forward. But do expect Isaiah Foskey, and then as well as some of the other moves. Well, Isaiah Foskey will be on the field this weekend, as well as some of the other moves that could potentially happen at defensive end. The Saints also will have 2 other roster spots still open as vacated by Traquan Smith and Jake Haener. Wouldn't be surprised to see some guys move up to the active roster, guys like Jalen Smith, potentially, maybe Ryan Conley instead. It could be Ryan Conley and Tony Jones Jr., depending upon what Kendre Miller's health is looking like going into next week. The 2 guys that they elevated as a standard game day elevation that now revert back to the practice squad. If the Saints really like their performance, they could just move those guys to the active roster. I know the favorite names to be thrown out there right now are Jalen Smith as well as Shaq Davis. Those are possible as well, but there's a lot of options for the New Orleans Saints, and things maybe get a little bit more tricky now that you're dealing with this injury for Payton Turner and trying to manage all of that. But thankfully, you've got Isaiah Foskey there waiting and ready to go already. All right, y'all, coming up in tomorrow's episode, it's Tuesday, so we're going to dive into analytics. Later on today, I'll have an update for you from, we've got some media availability and stuff like that with the Saints. So I'll get you some updates from that, as well as some of our shorter form stuff today. And then tomorrow morning, you'll have a brand new episode getting you all the analytics as well as the film study. I'm going to be doing an actual film study with film for all the subtext folks as well. So if you want to get on that, join subtext.com/LockedOnSaints, become a Locked On Saints insider. We'll be sending that out probably this afternoon. I appreciate you, as always, y'all, for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day, for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.